Good afternoon. I'm Pat Living with the Department of Health and Social Services and moderator for the COVID-19 update for Wednesday, July 22nd. We are joined today by the Yukon Premier Sandy Silver and the Yukon's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Brendan Hanley. We also have with us André Boursier from French Language Services Directorate, who will translate any questions from French-speaking journalists, and our sign language interpretation is provided by Mary Thiessen. Following our speakers, we will go to the phone lines for questions from reporters. We will call you by name, and you will each have one question plus one follow-up. Premier Silver?
Thank you very much, Matt. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us again here on the traditional territory of the Kwantlen First Nation and the Ta'an-Quachin Council. I'm very happy to be here with Dr. Hanley again this week. We are almost 20 weeks into Yukon's pandemic response. It's been a long road, and the off-ramp is not coming anytime soon. We're now at a point in time where we need to learn to live with the reality of COVID-19. We must now work forward towards that new normal for our lives in the weeks and months to come. It is possible and likely that we will see new cases in Yukon before a vaccine is available. Since releasing the Path Forward plan on May the 15th, we have made gradual steps to lift restrictions, only possible because of the diligence of Yukoners. In phase one, we saw the reopening of personal services, daycares, and early childhood learning spaces, restaurants. In phase two, we saw bars reopening at limited capacity, and the border restrictions between British Columbia, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut lifted, as well as visitors from other Canadian provinces welcome in with proper self-isolating protocols. Now, as we approach August the 1st, we are considering how we can continue to lift restrictions while also keeping Yukoners safe. We are working with outfitters to determine how they can welcome guests safely. Every outfitter will need to develop an operational plan that ensures guests stay out of contact with other Yukoners while they're in our territory. We're very pleased to have determined a way to move ahead with the outfitter season and know that outfitters will follow these recommendations because they also appreciate the need to keep Yukoners safe. While there are Yukoners who want us to move forward quickly, there are others that are feeling that we're moving too fast. As we have been throughout this process, we are balancing these levels of concerns with the science, the epidemiology of the virus. In speaking with Dr. Hanley and his team, we have determined that we will not be lifting travel restrictions currently in place between Yukon and other Canadian provinces just yet. With the recent increase in cases in the south, we will continue to require Canadians from provinces other than British Columbia, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut Territories to self-isolate for 14 days when they arrive in Yukon. We will also continue to limit gatherings to keep the numbers low. We are considering how to change the restrictions around gathering size and family bubbles, but again, we must determine what is safe to do so, and I know Dr. Hanley will expand upon that. We have seen how risky social gatherings can be and have recently seen significant spread resulting from private gatherings in people's homes and in other indoor spaces in other regions in Canada and in the States. I was reminded by Dr. Hanley that the cases that we've seen in Yukon have come from people returning to the Yukon. That is to say, all of our cases, they were contracted outside of the territory and folks came back with the virus. This indicates that we do not have community spread in the Yukon yet, and that's an extremely good thing. It shows that Yukoners are being careful, and they are following the safety protocols and doing their best to keep themselves and their families safe, for the most part. Thank you for the work that you're doing. We know it's not easy. I know it's not easy, but we need to keep up our efforts. On our side, we are enhancing our enforcement efforts. As I mentioned last week, we are launching a system to identify vehicles with out-of-territory plates that are authorized to be here. The visitor decals will be will be provided to, and these will be provided to critical service providers and travelers who have completed their 14-day self-isolation requirements, including Canadians with plates from jurisdictions outside of British Columbia, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Also to Americans providing essential services in the Yukon, and foreign residents that have been permitted entry to Canada by the Canadian Border Service Agency. The green visitor decal, which I have here, will be placed on the driver's side windshield to indicate that the occupants are authorized to travel in and around Yukon. Visitor decals, decals will not be issued to travelers in transit. Anyone who has not yet finished their 14-day mandatory self-isolation period. They will not be issued to vehicles from jurisdictions that are already part of the mobility bubble. That includes British Columbia, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, unless they specifically request them. Enforcement officers, SEMA enforcement officers, will issue visitor decals to travelers who have a legitimate reason for being here in the Yukon. Enforcement officers will continue to be stationed at our borders, and we will move, as we move towards and into, phase 3, to inform those entering of the rules and the expectations to follow upon entry. I want to thank the enforcement officers that have been doing exceptional work to educate visitors and investigate complaints that have come up. The folks that are on the telephone information lines and answering the emails, thank you very much for being such a positive voice of information to those who have concerns and questions. I know that travelers, including those in transit from the United States, are causing anxiety here and throughout Western Canada. I join in Premier Horgan from British Columbia in calling for stronger enforcement measures at Canada's southern borders. We are expecting the Canadian Border Service Agency to announce further measures to both inform and to track U.S. travelers entering into Canada. And I want to thank Minister Stryker and his team and Community Services for the continuing engagement with our counterparts in British Columbia, but also with the federal government in this really important initiative. We welcome efforts to keep Americans in transit informed of their responsibilities as they pass through our country, as well as enforcing the rules that are already in place. We will continue to work with our provincial and federal partners to protect the health and safety of Yukoners and all Canadians. Once again, I must thank Yukoners for all that they are doing. We have made tremendous sacrifices, and that is not an easy thing to do. Thank you. Continue to do what you need to do for Yukoners. Wash your hands. Stay home if you are feeling sick. Travel very respectfully through the communities. Self-isolate as required. Limit the number of gatherings, people in your gatherings. It's 50 for outside gatherings and 10 inside, if you can stay 2 meters apart. And keep practicing physical distancing. If you are following these steps, we can greatly reduce our own risk and, more importantly, the risk to others. And keeping check on people that are around you, your neighborhood, your community, it is always important to Yukoners. We are still in the midst of a very difficult time. Offer to help your neighbors or family members. Reach out to your loved ones and be kind to others. It's the Yukon way. We are in this together, and we will get through this together. Thank you very much for your time today. Dr. Hanley.
Thank you, Premier. And good afternoon, bon après-midi. Everything that you and I have done together to date has led to where we are today on our way to phase 3 of the path forward to recovery. Over the past several weeks, both the Premier and I have referenced the beginning of phase 3 anticipated to be August 1st, and I believe we're still on track for that. However, phase 3 will be a long phase. While we had looked forward to removing the self-isolation requirements on August 1st for some of the other jurisdictions in Canada, and we have been keeping an eye on Alberta in particular, I feel that we're not quite ready to do that. I'm not comfortable with the numbers I'm seeing, nor with the level of risk that exists for us to be able to remove that requirement for self-isolation for Albertans. We're watching a few other jurisdictions, and given what we are presently seeing in BC, we need to take a few more weeks to get a better picture on which way the trends are going. Of course, we're closely watching BC, and with the recent rises in cases primarily in the Kelowna area, I have to caution anyone going to BC to take precautions, and I'll touch on that a bit later. I want to make sure that Yukoners who are traveling to Kelowna in particular, that you're very careful on your return. If you develop any symptoms, ensure that you carry out the self-assessment or call 811 to get advice on being tested. Keep a low profile after coming back. Avoid social gatherings, especially large or random social gatherings. And of course, stay well spaced for others and pay special attention to the other features of the Safe 6. So although we are going ahead with Phase 3, given how well we've been doing in the current phase, Phase 3 will start slowly and progress slowly. Closing the borders back in March was a swift and heavy tool that we needed to put into place to protect ourselves and our health system. The border actions and enforcements, along with enforced self-isolation measures, allowed us time to gather our resources, prepare and plan for the arrival of COVID-19 in Yukon. And I'm confident now in our ability to test as necessary, to trace contacts as required. I'm confident in the healthcare system's surge plan and in our capacity to respond to an outbreak. We've had the time and the advantage as being a small jurisdiction to act quickly and to learn from others. But we also know that the closed society has contributed to many of what we might call the side effects of COVID closure on our society. We have, for some time, categorized the human toll in mental health consequences, substance use harms and overdoses, domestic violence, severe financial distress to individuals, communities, and businesses. We know that eventually we must move away from enforcement at the borders, as we have started to do with the BC Northern Bubble and the removal of the restricted entry order. We need to move slowly towards a point where self-isolation is not mandated at the borders upon entry, but becomes more of an individual tool when necessary to be used for an individual in contact with COVID or coming from a high-risk area to undergo. Enforcement eventually is better applied at settings where COVID risk is higher, in workplaces, bars, restaurants, and other premises where adjustments to reduce the chances of outbreaks and exposures have had to be made. And by the way, we are doing very well there overall. Inspections of bars, restaurants, and workplaces have shown overwhelmingly strong compliance with the necessary guidance. Phase 3 will include changes to the double bubble, the two-household bubble, and how we will interact with people we know. Expanding the social circle can be important for many reasons. It allows us to connect with family and friends, which in turn supports good mental health, and it allows for additional supports for childcare or elder care if needed. It also allows for rapid contact tracing in the event of a case of COVID-19 within a social circle. It's far simpler to trace and isolate COVID-19 if we know who an individual has been in touch with. We will be developing guidance and criteria on what exactly we will be advising. For the time being, I will say it'll be a little less prescriptive about maintaining a two-household bubble, but will be more about holding your social circles small, well-behaved, and consistent. This soft launch of Phase 3 by August 1st also permits us to re-examine our direction for gatherings. I'm still concerned about indoor gatherings, particularly house parties and other areas with close indoor contact. The limit to household social gatherings will remain at 10, These gatherings should continue to include members of your bubble or close social circle only. Otherwise, indoor visitors should ensure that they are well and appropriately spaced. We are working on specific guidelines for indoor seated and planned events, allowing events that are planned, organized, supervised, and seated in various indoor facilities, whether community halls or other spaces, is much safer than where people are mingling and congregating. This would allow ceremonies such as weddings and funerals outside of churches to take place, or allow a sewing circle or some such other event to be hosted. Last week, we announced that we were expanding the testing criteria, as had been anticipated before then. So testing has gone up since then, and some of these increased testing numbers may be attributed to individuals concerned after the border opening on July 1st, as well as Yukoners returning from travel outside Yukon. Of course, we now have a broader symptom list, so we have been testing individuals with a wider variety of symptoms. So far, we've had 79. I think we have some revisions as of today, but more or less a doubling of testing numbers in the last week since the testing criteria changed. 13 cases in the last 5 months, again, as the Premier mentioned, are all related to the Yukoners who have traveled outside of Yukon. Our two most recent cases are Yukoners who came into contact with the disease outside of the territory and who will remain outside until recovered, and both are doing well. As we slowly move away from enforcement, I want to touch a little bit on personal and community responsibility. I know well the COVID fatigue that is wearing us down 4 months in. And we know the effects of these relapses occurring, whether in Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, recently in the Okanagan. When we stop practicing physical distancing, good hand hygiene, or staying home when we're sick, when we let our guard down, that's when we let the disease back in. We do have a shared responsibility to each other, and it's our responsibility to do the right thing, to adhere to the Safe Six. And if you think it's not important for you individually, think about all the people you come into contact with. When it comes to COVID, young people may feel invincible. They feel they can perhaps be exposed to COVID and get away with it. And for the most part, that's true. They will tolerate COVID very well, but they're not completely immune. And the more that young people will be affected, the more risk there is for one of those to get severe disease. But as well, the higher risk is in transmitting the disease to others and in potentially bringing it home to people that will be more vulnerable, whether that's people with underlying medical conditions or older people. I know many engaged and passionate young people here, and we need all our youth and young adults to help protect those who aren't invincible. We need all of us to think of someone who we want to protect. Maybe a father-in-law who's undergoing chemo, a grandparent who is at risk because of age and inability to fight the disease, or even a middle-aged single parent who has to work to support her children and who can't afford to stay home, but will have to do so if sick. So we all have a personal responsibility, and we need as one large community to help each other. Remember the 3 C's I have borrowed and mentioned many times. These are still to be remembered as the higher risk settings for COVID: closed spaces, crowds, close contact with others. They're also, at the risk of alliterative fatigue, there are also 3 positive C's that will help us get through this: caring, community-minded, and calm. Let's look out for each other and look after each other in a calm way. Help each other Help others by keeping yourself safe and supporting others as they navigate these difficult times. Remember Team Yukon. We're still a team, and we're still not even at half-time in this long, long game. Let's stick together in spirit, even as we maintain our distance, and let's keep up our respect for and trust in others, and trust ourselves to do the right thing for our community. Thank you. Merci. Merci, Joe.
Thank you, Dr. Hanley. Thank you, Premier Silver. We'll now go to the phone lines, and we'll start with Doug from Shone FM.
Thank you. Am I here? Okay. My question is for Dr. Hanley. There has been a lot of back and forth about the use of, or the mandatory use of face masks. And I know I asked the question last week, but I'd like to hear it straight from you. Is there a threshold where the mandatory use of face masks will be implemented?
Thanks for that question. And it's a good question, and it's probably one I think that is worth asking every now and then, and revisiting and noting. Again, I think Calgary just recently made masks mandatory. No, I'm still not in favor of making masks mandatory, and it's certainly not mandatory for healthy people in Yukon to wear masks in public at this time. It's a personal decision. I do recommend, as I have reiterated and again taken from the advice of the Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, that masks should be worn in places, particularly indoor spaces where physical spacing cannot be maintained. And there have been a few cases of where we have either strongly recommended or advised masks, or even written them into our guidance. And an example of that is in personal care settings, where physical space can sometimes needs to be broached in order to get your hair done or a haircut. We do say in our guidance that masks should be worn. I know that Whitehorse City Transit will be using my advice to recommend masks when using public transit, and that's anticipated. Mask usage is part of a requirement now in Yukon airports. So there's definitely growing use, and I think a growing place for masks in certain settings, but particularly, again, that emphasis where physical spacing can't be maintained. And I think there needs to be more comfort with people using masks and feeling comfortable using masks in those settings. Fortunately, as again I've said before, we're lucky to have very few places where mask use is advisable, just because we have in general lots of space, and a well-spaced facility should not require the use of masks. So if the other measures, the Safe Six, are observed, given where we are, given our absence of community transmission, our paucity of cases, I think this is a comfortable place for us to be in. So I'd like to see more comfort with the use of masks, especially where people choose to use them. But I feel a long way from mandating mask use.
Do you have a follow-up question, Doug?
No, thank you.
Thank you. We'll move now to Tim at CKRW.
Hello, good afternoon. My question is for the Premier, and it's in regards to the education changes that were announced, and the government's been receiving some feedback about the MAD program, the move regarding grade 10 to 12, and the movement of grade 8s from FH over to Wood Street. Just wondering who made that decision, and if it was a government decision and not from Dr. Hanley, why did you make this decision, and will you make any adjustments?
Thanks, Tim, for the question. Again, as we've been saying, this is not an ordinary situation, and this will not be an ordinary school year, not in Yukon, not in Canada. This is about putting the interests of the students first, and our focus is always on ensuring that as many students as possible can return to full day in-class instruction. Minister McPhee did meet with many of the demonstrators that we've had here yesterday and had a very good very good conversation. She heard the concerns and was able to clear up a lot of misinformation as well that was out there about the plans and how this year, came to be. I know that there's been weekly updates from the minister and her team. I want to commend the Department of Education, the principals, the school councils, the educational partners right across the territory who have worked together to ensure that students will return to class next month. And that's extremely important that we have kids returning, students returning in these extraordinary times. And our focus has always been, as a government, to make sure that we move forward with the safety of our students most in mind.
Follow-up question.
Yeah, we didn't answer who made the decision.
We made the decision.
As a government?
Absolutely. And of course, every decision that we're making during a pandemic, it does follow recommendations from public health, whether it's opening up of bars and restaurants or what we do to make sure that we have the social distancing, the parameters in place for our education citizens as well, our students as well. But again, consultation with the schools, with the school councils. The department makes these decisions with the safety of the students in mind, but they make it with the educational community at hand as well.
Tim, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Just in regards to the Legislative Assembly, and again, another issue we're getting some blowback on, there have been other legislative assemblies meeting across the country. I know it is summertime and a lot of people are camping right now, but would you consider, and I know we're due for an early October start date, but would you consider maybe starting in mid-September? Because there's certainly a lot to talk about.
So, again, when it comes to whether or not we're going to meet in the Legislative Assembly, the Legislative Assembly is to pass bills. When it comes to emergency spending, we will do what this government has done for decades, whether it be for COVID or for floods or forest fires. Whenever there's emergency spending that wasn't already passed in the spring budget, we will have a supplementary budget. All the spending will be analyzed and will run through the appropriate legislative scrutiny. So until we have a need to open up the Legislative Assembly, that's when we have the bills ready. Again, we've made offers to the opposition to come in and to ask questions, supplementary budget, main budget, whatever they have in mind in all the departments, with the assistant deputy ministers available. They refuse to come in for those questions. We've offered the orders in council that deal with COVID for briefings in there. Haven't heard back from them on that. So wanting to, the scrutiny of the Legislative Assembly is a great place for sure, and we're getting ready for the fall, and we're look forward to defending our decisions to keep Yukoners safe.
Thank you. We'll move now to Gabrielle from Whitehorse Star.
Hi, I'm hoping, Dr. Hanley, could you elaborate a bit on the recommendation that Yukoners returning from BC keep a low profile? What does that look like?
Yeah, thanks. And really, I think this needs to be our language of, although to a large extent has always been our language, I think it needs to be our language for the future, is that people are mindful of travel. As Dr. Henry says herself, bring your travel manners with you. Travel wisely, so that when you are traveling, make sure that you're respecting the requests and the requirements of BC as which are very close to our own. Maintaining that physical distancing and avoiding those random events and gatherings that have been associated with the cases in Kelowna. So really, your goal when you travel out is to obviously try to avoid exposure and try to avoid bringing COVID back into Yukon. So specifically, I think when you're aware that you've been in an area that is subject to active cases and an outbreak, as in the Kelowna area since early July, late June, early July, that you just be aware that you may have been exposed. So what does keeping a profile mean? It means just being mindful of symptoms, keeping a watch, and if you do develop any symptoms, any new symptoms, call for assessment, do the self-assessment or call 811. I would advise you to be very careful about social gatherings and taking extra precaution to avoid social gatherings. So it doesn't mean you have to self-isolate, but it means you need to be very aware of where you're being and just be very prudent.
Follow up, Gabrielle?
Hi, I'm also wondering if there's an update to the number of complaints made to the enforcement line. I know, Premier Silver, you said last week that there are quite a few being made in relation to out-of-territory license plates, and I'm just wondering if that's still happening.
I don't have an updated number right here for you, Gabrielle, but what I can do is I can talk with Minister Stryker to get you that information. I will say, having phone calls with chief and councils, and John's having Minister Stryker having conversations with the mayors and councils, and anecdotal information. We hear a lot of concern. It doesn't translate necessarily to the volume of calls that are being reported at, and I'll give you the phone number here. It's 1-877-374-0425. We know that a lot of cases, the license plates that people do see, they're people that do have the ability, do have the right to be here. I have note here about, in a majority of the cases of the complaints that we do get, enforcement has received, it's about out-of-territory plates, end up being about vehicles who have been here since before the border measures were introduced, or they belong to people that have completed their self-isolation and can be here. In other cases, there are plates that could belong to our neighbors from Skagway or from Haines that are here to access essential medical services, and they cannot get home. Someone transitioning through may have some vehicle issues and need to get some repairs. Lodging on destination routes may be fully booked, and a family with young children may need to rest so that they're safe and secure in completing their transit. So these are the types of complaints, and then the follow-up that we do see from these phone lines, and also from COVID-19 enforcement at gov.yk.ca. I think it's important to always reiterate when we're talking about border provisions, thousands of Alaskan travel vehicles going towards Alaska have safely transitioned through Yukon, and we have not reported a single COVID case based upon that traffic stream. We do know that there's a lot of concerns for sure. We'd ask you, if you see a plate, the decal is going to help out quite a bit as well. If you see this decal on somebody's vehicle without out-of-territory plates, you know that they've done the right things and they can be where they are. But really, Dr. Hanley and I really want to have a message today of what keeps us up at night is the parties, the people that aren't doing the proper social distancing, people that think it's been a long road and I'm kind of sick of doing what we need to do. It's hard, we get it, but that's the big issue. I'm seeing a lot more Yukoners on social media, calling people out. You posted a picture, you're too close, that kind of thing. Being very vigilant and helping out your neighbors to make sure that they know what they're doing. If we concentrate our efforts on making sure that Yukoners are keeping Yukoners safe, then Dr. Hanley and I will be able to sleep a lot easier. Knowing that the federal government is boosting up their Alaskan provisions, and more details to come on that. Much more restrictive, with a lens to try to curtail that loophole that we've been hearing about a bit. Making sure that their measures match up with our measures, making sure that they at the border know what the rules are in the jurisdictions that people transit through is extremely important. But again, the complaints that are coming in, that's usually the responses that we're getting, but we're still maintaining vigilance when it comes to making sure that people on their way to Alaska stay on their route and keep our communities safe.
Thank you. We'll move now to Chris, CBC.
Hi, thanks. I guess I'm curious to know, with the uptick in cases in British Columbia, how close are we to a situation where Dr. Hanley might consider the need to revisit these loosening of border restrictions and maybe reimpose some of these restrictions on travel from British Columbia?
If I could, before Dr. Hanley comments, I think it's a really important question, Chris. In Kelowna, we're talking about a couple of parties, and those couple of parties created dozens and dozens and dozens of cases. So I think the message again here is, for our younger Yukoners, we implore you, please, for the safety of yourselves, but more importantly, the safety of people with compromised immune systems, our elderly, your grandparents, these types of things. Please, we're not out of the woods, and we really need Yukoners, especially our young people. We're seeing a lot of trends and upticks in these cases in younger populations. We need you more than ever to stand up for the rest of Yukoners. Dr. Hanley, if you want to.
Yeah, thanks, and it's a great question. Thanks for that. And obviously, I am concerned. We're watching closely, and we do expect to see more cases associated with that. Kelowna, following what the Dr. Henry and others are saying. However, that is it is still a reasonably isolated area. So we're talking about basically the Kelowna area. Now, there are some increases in other parts of BC, but really relatively small increases that we're seeing in the Lower Mainland, for example. So this is, COVID behaving as it does. Outbreaks occurring with as the Premier says, associated with a couple of private parties, and then the consequences of those young people carrying the infection into bars and restaurants and other parties along the waterfront area in Kelowna. So I would be, as long as this stays a localized event, I would be much more inclined to keep advice around perhaps maybe more segmented advice. So, just right now advising if you are traveling to Kelowna, be very aware, keep an eye on what's happening, be aware of your contacts. And if you have been in that area, especially in the active area, to be very prudent when you're coming back. So depending on what happens, would we change that to more of a recommendation to self-isolate if you've been in that area, or to even avoid travel? Possibly. Those would be, I think, areas that we might contemplate advising Yukoners on. But I would be much less inclined to advise going back on our BC bubble, unless we were to see something much more widespread and much more of a kind of a clear and present threat, you might say.
Follow up, Chris?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess the other question I have is with regards to mostly American travelers, but I suppose this also could apply to folks from outside the bubble as well. Can you just, elaborate on the obligations of businesses in terms of serving people? I'm thinking specifically in terms of bars and restaurants. Like, do they have either a duty? Do they have a duty to refuse service to folks from outside the bubble who are also outside the travel corridor?
It's a good question. We have had folks from businesses contact us about exactly these initiatives. But if you're traveling into Yukon and if you're told what you have to do. It's your responsibility, ultimately. It's hard, again, for a business owner to really know without pushing in certain circumstances whether or not somebody is supposed to be there or not supposed to be there. We've heard people offering up to business owners in Dawson, for example, where I've had folks that would call me and say, this person just told me they're not self-isolating. And so I get them to call the phone line, and we get the officials, the SEMA enforcement officers, to do what they do. So first, I want to thank those businesses that are keeping up with the rules, not only necessarily just for their businesses and making sure that their customers are safe, but also understanding the parameters for people that are traveling as well. So the responsibility is on the individuals, for sure. But again, it's a serious issue that we are working with BC, with Premier Horgan on, as far as the BC, the United States border. I've added my voice to his to call for stronger restrictions on the southern borders. People who have essential reasons to get into Alaska, well, they do have alternative routes. You can fly, you can take the ferry systems as well. So as we track and monitor the international situation, the United States situation, we are keeping an eye on the traffic. Again, and I know I sound like a broken record, but we have yet to have a single case of COVID-19 transmitted related to United States travel. So the provisions that are put in place, the diligence of Yukoners, whether it be business owners or not, has been proven to be effective so far. But we are not taking our sight off of the situation, and we are ramping up our participation at the federal level, at the national level, with our colleagues in British Columbia as well.
Okay, we'll move now to Jackie, Yukon News.
Hi. This week, the Narwhal published a story that said the Yukon is being, quote, flooded, unquote, with mushroom pickers who are ignoring COVID-19 restrictions. I'm wondering if the Yukon government is following up on this report saying that there are mushroom pickers and buyers who are essentially lying to get into the territory and to get to these burns and pick.
I would say we're definitely monitoring the situation, not based upon narwhal, but based upon the participation of the Yukon First Nations chiefs and councillors in our weekly updates, and also the municipalities as well. I know that many of our ministers, Dr. Hanley's office as well, we've heard the situation, the complaints, the concerns in communities. We're working very closely with First Nations partners to address the concerns about the morel pickers. We have stopped issuing permits for this year, again, we're urging everybody to be very respectful to those people that are traveling throughout our territory. And if you do have any questions or concerns about people who you think should or should not be in a certain area, as opposed to approaching them and being hostile, we're encouraging you to phone in at the phone line. Again, 1-877-374-0425, or also email COVID-19 enforcement at gov.yk.ca. So monitoring the situation, absolutely, but not based upon an article. Where it's based upon the amazing participation that we've seen with the First Nations governments and the municipalities as well.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Jackie?
Yeah, Dr. Hanley and Premier Silver, you've both mentioned you're both urging young people to not have parties, not have these gatherings, to kind of stick it out. I'm wondering if any enforcement officers have actually responded to any reports of parties or gatherings over 50 people outdoors, 10 people indoors, whether any warnings have been issued as well.
I'm not sure about the actual enforcement as far as whether warnings have been given out or not. I know that there have been some calls in after the fact as well, which is not as helpful. What we do see is a lot of people pointing to social media and saying, "Look, we just saw in this particular community or in this town, evidence of something that might have been after the fact." I would have to get Minister Stryker to parse out the numbers as far as what amount of the calls that are coming in that a previous journalist asked about, and what part of those were specifically to people not self-isolating or gathering in gatherings larger than what is acceptable. And I'll get that information for you.
Thank you. We move now to Mario, Radio-Canada.
Hi
there. Yeah, my first question actually for French listeners, if Mr. Hanley can answer just in French, peut-être juste nous donner un petit résumé de ce qui va changer et ce qui va pas changer avec la troisième phase si ça entre en jeu le 3 août. Donc, ce qui va changer, par exemple, comme vous l'avez dit, là, les restrictions ou les bulles de famille, et ce qui ne va pas changer, les restrictions par rapport au voyage. Si vous pouviez me dire ça en français, ce serait très sympathique.
So the question is for Dr. Hanley. Can you please give a small resume of what you said about what will change and what will not change with phase 3?
Oui, merci. Et c'est premièrement pour expliquer que la troisième phase, c'est prévu pour une longue durée. Donc, on a beaucoup de temps et on n'est pas pressé de faire des mesures tout de suite, surtout les mesures à la frontière. Donc, pour le moment, les mesures restent aux frontières. Mais on prévoit pour le long terme que les mesures aux frontières sera graduellement enlevées et l'enforcement va plutôt sur l'inspection des facilités, des restaurants, des bars, des autres endroits où on a des régulations, des recommandations en place. La quarantaine reste ouverte avec le Nord et avec Colombie-Britannique, mais pour le moment, ça veut dire pour les prochaines 1, 2, peut-être 3 semaines ou même plus, on va rester avec la quarantaine pour les autres provinces. Donc on va pas entrer dans les avec on va pas enlever la quarantaine, la commande de quarantaine pour les autres provinces pour le moment. Donc on a besoin plus de temps pour faire une analyse et de suivre la situation en Alberta et dans les autres provinces. Donc on va faire des changements aux boules, en boules domestiques. On va changer la langue, le langage autour de boules domestiques et on va revenir avec plus de détails sur ça la semaine prochaine. Et pour les rassemblements de gens, on va rester avec le maximum de 10 pour l'intérieur, mais on va faire une autre catégorie, ça veut dire pour les rassemblements qui sont organisés, donc qui sont supervisés, planifiés, organisés. Et on va revenir aussi avec plus de détails la semaine prochaine.
Merci. Avez-vous une autre question, Mario?
Oui, I guess my second question in English for Premier Silver about the decals. Is it expected to help active enforcement? Like, will there be people on the field looking if people with plates have these decals or not, or are we really with this hoping more to alleviate or help better make the complaints at least more easier for Yukoners?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And that's my accent. I call them decals. I'm sure they're decals, but so I think the most important thing here is that there's many valid reasons why folks are in Yukon and not on transportation routes towards Alaska. This definitely will help out, seeing the decal on vehicles. And if you're concerned about it, if it was at a box store or downtown or at a grocery store, with this decal, there'd be less calls into the enforcement. Again, I want to give a shout out to Toronto Cochin. Their government, when you're coming into Dawson City, they, for Yukon situation, they kind of invented it. They had a check mark for locals so that they didn't have to go into the check stops all the time. And it was a really effective tool to not have the folks that are doing enforcement or information having to keep on rechecking vehicles that were okay. I know that Minister Stryker's team, Minister McPhee's team, has been working with the federal government as well as far as further information on how we can do a very similar thing for folks that are on a transportation route to Alaska. So more details to come on that. But really, for right now, this is going to be very helpful for what we hear is a big concern. But I've been on the mic before saying, in Dawson there was something like 15 complaints all about the same vehicle with American plates, but that person was a third-generation Yukoner. So these decals, if they were on that vehicle, we wouldn't have as many complaints. It's just another way that we're upping our enforcement abilities and our communications with the communities. Again, borrowing ideas from the Toronto Cochin government and also a lens to working with the federal government on more decals when it comes to travelers, international travelers on their way to Alaska.